Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Isle of Man NAHT special COVID-19 briefing. We are delighted to welcome so many of you with us here tonight. We're delighted to welcome members of NAHT, but also non-members of NAHT, members of our sister unions across the island, and also parents, governors, and other interested parties here tonight. Thank you very much for being part of it. My name's Laura Flynn. I'll be your facilitator for this evening, and I'm a regional organiser for NAHT, and we are delighted to welcome a very impressive panel here tonight. You'll be hearing from Carol Walsh. She is the branch secretary of Isle of Man NAHT, and she's a head teacher in South Douglas. We'll also be hearing from Paul Whiteman, who is general secretary of NAHT nationally across the UK. Max Kelly, he is president of NAHT Isle of Man branch, and he's a head teacher in Laxey. And we're also delighted to welcome Dr. Henrietta Ewart, who is Director of Public Health for the Isle of Man, and Dr. Allison, MHK, Minister for Education, Sport and Culture. So good evening, everybody. Very pleased to welcome you all here tonight. Do join us in the chat room by clicking on the chat function at the bottom of the screen. My colleague Marta will be there. He'll be able to help you with any queries you may have, any technical issues, but do please say hello and let us know where you're watching from tonight. We have some questions that have been submitted in advance for the Minister and the Director, and we'll be asking those, but you are welcome to submit a question tonight. We've got the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, so please do submit your questions there. Do not submit the questions in the chat room. Can I ask that when you submit a question, you say who it's for, whether it's for Dr. Allinson or Dr. Ewart. And also please do look if the same or a similar question has been submitted already. And rather than asking the same question again, you can vote for that question by clicking the thumbs up button, and we will take questions to the Minister and to the Director of Public Health in order of popularity. So I'll give you a quick overview of how it's going to run tonight. We're going to start off hearing from Carol Walsh, Branch Secretary of Isle of Man NAHT. We'll then be hearing from NAHT UK General Secretary Paul Whiteman, and we'll be having a short poll to get your opinion, a snap poll to ask you a question and get your views. And then we'll hear from the Minister, Dr. Allison. So please do submit your questions to him via the Q&A button below, and do let us know if the question is for him or if the question is for Dr. Ewart, who we'll be moving to after that. And then we'll be hearing from Max Kelly, President of NAHT Isle of Man, who will host this evening. So please do join with us on Twitter. We're using the hashtag IOM COVID School Response. That's IOM COVID School Response. And we hope that you can participate that way, and also in the chat room and via the Q&A button. So thank you very much again for all of you joining us, for those of you who are members of NAHT and NAHT Edge, but also non-members, members from sister trade unions, and anybody who's listening here tonight. You're very welcome, and we hope you can participate fully in the broadcast tonight. But first of all, I'm going to hand over to Carol Walsh, who is Branch Secretary of NAHT, to welcome you all this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. I'd also like to add my thanks to you all for joining us on such an absolutely gorgeous evening. I'm sure many of you would rather be sat in the garden with a glass of beer in your hand, but thank you ever so much for joining us instead. I'd like to start off by paying tribute to all my colleagues within education. We've been through a pretty torrid time recently, yet you've all very calmly and efficiently kept all our hub schools open for all our key worker and vulnerable children, alongside providing innovative remote learning, something that we had to be very, very quick in devising at a starting position of virtually nil. And I have to applaud and congratulate all my colleagues, because there's been lots and lots of innovative practice which has come about because of this. I'd also like to say an enormous thank you to my colleagues on the local NAHT executive. They have all worked tirelessly throughout this pandemic to ensure that you had the information that you needed, alongside keeping you and your children in the hubs safe. I'm absolutely delighted that Dr. Henrietta Ewart and Dr. Alex Allinson have joined us here this evening, because we're now about to move into a new phase. All our schools will be opening again for all our children, and I, for one, and I know all my colleagues, all my head teacher colleagues, are absolutely delighted about that. It's been very difficult not having all our children in our schools, and to get them all back, hopefully next week, will be just fabulous. But I know you've got lots and lots of questions that you wish to ask both Dr. Ewart and Dr. Allinson. We are so lucky to be in such a good place on our beautiful island. 26 days, no extra cases, no COVID out there. How well have we done? How well have you all done? Thank you. Thank you. So we're about to move on to this wider reopening of schools, and I really hope this webinar proves to be informative and useful for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carol, for that. It's really lovely to hear from a school leader's perspective and from someone in the profession. So thank you very much. And thanks again, to echo what Carol said, to all of you who work in education for everything that you've done over the last few months in keeping schools open during this difficult time. Thank you. So just to remind you, we have the chat function. If you do want to say hello, or if you do have, if you want to talk to each other, that's absolutely fine. If you do want to ask a question of the Minister or of the Director of Public Health, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And as I said, do not ask the same or similar question again if you can upvote by using the thumbs up button, and we will ask questions in order of popularity. But I'll now move to Paul Whiteman, who is General Secretary of NAHT across the UK, to give you a short address. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks so much for having me this evening. It's a real pleasure to be with you. Normally I get to fly over to the Isle of Man for a visit, and I'm well looked after when I come over, and fantastic hospitality, and I've been with you on a lovely warm evening as described, and we perhaps be having a glass of something while we discuss the trials and tribulations of being a professional educator. But the pandemic and all the pressures we're under have put paid to that, and it really underlines events like this two things really. One, the sense of community and professionalism that you all bring and that you've brought to your job during this difficult time, but also that your voice can be expressed through your union, the NAHT. And I'm absolutely delighted that we've got Henrietta and Alex with us, so that they can hear directly from you and not just through us, so that they know that when the NAHT speaks, it is the authentic voice of school leaders on the Isle of Man. And I bring greetings and support from your colleagues across the UK. I've just come from a meeting where I was talking to colleagues in Northern Ireland, in Wales and in England, and talking about all the different responses and where the different seats of government are in terms of their response. And I think in the Isle of Man, you're in a nearly unique position of probably having seen off COVID as far as you can tell right now, with no new cases and with the relaxation that I've just heard about. And I think that should be cherished. And then whatever you do from now on in should be careful, but actually should be on that mission of making sure that it first doesn't return and you proceed as safely as you possibly can, but also to begin to restore and rebuild from the damage that children may have suffered in terms of the interruption to their education. And I wish you all the very best with that. What I'm also aware of is our relationship with government has been intermittent or up and down throughout this year in terms of how we've got on and the things that we've discussed. And we have a vibrant branch on the Isle of Man. It's the fastest growing branch in the National Union. And that's always the case when there's some difficulties that we need to work through. And any of you that have seen me come and speak know that there can be a sharpness to my tongue now and again when necessary, but that's not what we're about this evening. I think what we're about this evening is recognising that in a pandemic, things become very difficult, things become very strained. But my appeal to everybody here is that we find ways through those difficulties, and we find ways to progress in the interests of children and in the interests of progress. So I will mention a couple of things that have been difficult before I finish. But my appeal, as I say, is that we find our ways through those, and we don't use or we don't find quick solutions during a period of pressure that might seem reasonable at the time, or they might seem efficient at the time, but actually go on to cause us some difficulties in the longer term. But as I say, the fastest growing branch in the National Union, and the National Union is very cited on what's been happening in the Isle of Man, because it's been so up and down, and you certainly have the support. And what do I mean by that? What's the purpose of the NAHT? So our job pretty much is quite easy to state, which is to create the best conditions under which school leadership can thrive. And if school leadership thrives, then children thrive and they get the very best education possible to them. And that means engaging with government and engaging with all the services that are around children as well. So that sounds quite an easy mission, doesn't it? And what do I talk about in what we have to do to achieve those things? Well, I talk about growth, community and voice. The union needs to grow so that politicians and others take you seriously and take the NAHT seriously as being the representative body for leadership within education. And as I say, the Isle of Man branch is the biggest growing branch, but the union itself, I'm told today we hit 32,000 members, working members that is, that doesn't include our retired members, whereas we started our project when I became General Secretary 2.5 years ago with 27,500. So our conversations about the power of your voice and the power of your professionalism are appealing as we go through year by year. And with that growth, what we can do is build communities. And the community on the Isle of Man, I see in two ways. It's our professional community as an association and your deep sense of community as an island. Actually, I'm struck by it every time I arrive, just how you care for each other, how you support each other, and that sense of community on the island, which is something I don't see in England especially, but in Wales and Northern Ireland too. It's certainly not what I experience when I come to the Isle of Man, and that's something that should be cherished. And whenever we have difficulties to get through, surely we should use that sense of community to hold each other's hands through those difficulties and achieve the very best education system that we can. So that sense of community is important, but that sense of professional community, making sure that when we are talking to politicians and talking to each other, we have robust debate and we find the very best solutions that we can. But we have that sense of belonging and that sense of mutual support, which I think has been particularly important through this crisis right across education, right across the UK. And I've seen it reported from your colleagues in the Isle of Man. Your branch, Max, Carol and others are a fantastic and active branch. And I know that by the amount of trouble I get from them is how active a branch is. And they're certainly on at me quite a lot for added support and intervention and inclusion in the union. So my congratulations go to you as a branch as well. But just picking on that community, if we've got that, if we've got the right numbers of people in and that sense of community, then your voice becomes irresistible. And when we talk to Alex and colleagues in Tynwald and we talk about what education needs, you know what is necessary to deliver fantastic education. It doesn't sit a fantastic education, the responsibility for that or the delivery of that doesn't sit on the minister's shoulders. It doesn't sit on the shoulders of inspectors or link advisors. It sits on your shoulders as school leaders and experts in education. You should be taken seriously, and we should take politicians seriously in what they're trying to achieve and work together to achieve those. And when we have ups and downs, when I read of the necessity to make a complaint because of evidence given to a committee that we don't think is accurate, we should do that, and we should be unapologetic about doing that. But nor should we allow those ups and downs get in the way of progress. So I'll finish on that appeal again. We will stand up for what you think is necessary. We will support you in that. We've got your back on that. But going through difficult times doesn't mean unnecessary conflict, and it doesn't mean destructive conversations. We find our way through it, and we will find a way to deliver the very best education we can for children on the Isle of Man if we work together with Parliament. But we will stand up for you if it doesn't go in the direction that education experts, teachers and school leaders know it has to go. So I'll finish on that for now. I'll be with you for the evening, and if there's any way you want to invite me back in at some point, Laura, I'll be more than happy to do so. But congratulations to you all so far.
Thank you very much for that, Paul, and thank you to you as well for giving up your evening. And I'm sure it will be of great heart to our members in the Isle of Man and also to non-members of the Isle of Man to know that have the support of the union beyond the island, the support of the National Union. So thank you very much for joining us. We're going to launch a quick poll now. so which will hopefully appear on your screen just now. So the question is, throughout the state of emergency, do you feel that the Department of Education, Sport and Culture has supported children, parents and schools effectively? Throughout the state of emergency, do you feel that the Department of Education, Sport and Culture has supported children, parents and schools effectively? It's a yes/no question. I'll just give you a moment to answer that and just remind you to please join us in the chat room. Do say hello, do let us know where you're watching from here tonight. It's great to know where people are from, and if we have anybody from off the island as well, please do say hello and let us know about that. And second of all, we've got the Q&A button at the bottom for you to ask questions of our panellists tonight. So please do let us know which panellists you would like your question addressed to, whether you want to ask it of Dr. Allinson, Dr. Ewart, or if you would like to ask a question of NAHT General Secretary Paul Whiteman. I'm sure he would be able to answer any questions as well if you would like to direct something to him. So I'll just give you a moment longer just to do the poll, another 20 seconds. But please do let us know if you have any questions via the Q&A button. Just another 10 seconds. Apologies if you're not able to see the poll on your particular browser. We've had quite a few people, we've had nearly 100 people vote. So apologies if you're one of those that can't see it, but we have got a significant number who've managed to participate. So I'll end the poll now. And the results are 38% said yes, they felt that they had been supported by the Department of Education, Sport and Culture, and 62% said no, they hadn't felt supported by DESC. Thank you very much to everybody who took part in that. And again, apologies if you weren't able to see it. So just before we move on to hearing from the Minister, again, if you would like to ask a question on the night, and it might be as the Minister's talking, you may think of a question, please do submit it in the Q&A button at the bottom, not in the chat room. And please do make it clear who you're asking the question of, whether it's of the Minister, of Dr. Ewart, Director of Public Health, or Paul Whiteman, NAHT General Secretary. So once again, thank you very much to our guests. It's been quite a busy day for Dr. Allinson. It's been quite a busy few months. But we are extremely grateful of him for wanting to take the opportunity to speak directly to the profession and to answer your questions. And I will be very happy to hand him the floor. Thank you very much.
Right. Can you hear me? So just so I can make sure I have unmuted myself. Is that okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Fine. We've gone virtual in Tynwald, and sometimes it really doesn't work. First of all, I'd like to thank Laura and NAHT for setting up this webinar. It was a great honour to be made Minister for Education, Sport and Culture on the 3rd of March. And at that time, I knew what the job entailed. I think Paul's been rather moderate to say that the relationship with government up until then had been intermittent and up and down. I would probably paint it as a little bit worse than that, and a lack of understanding and obviously a feeling of a lack of trust with the department. And so I came in committed to working with all the people who work in the education service, particularly teachers, and working with the unions, because I do believe that unions have an inherent and fundamental role in terms of representing their members, particularly in fields such as education. I never in a moment expected within 3 weeks to be in the position of closing down all the schools on the island. I don't think any of us did. And I think this period of health emergency has perhaps exacerbated some of the troubles and disagreements and misunderstandings beforehand, and added some new ones onto it as well. But what it has shown right the way through for somebody coming in new to the sector is an amazing amount of dedication and flexibility amongst teachers and everyone else who works in schools to adapt to a completely unknown situation very, very quickly, and adapt it in a way that was absolutely novel for most of us. Within literally 48 hours, we went from not having any cases on the Isle of Man and seeing stuff on the news, having our first case, closing the schools, and then subsequently closing the borders. And I think the way that education has been affected in particular is a wider way that the whole island has been affected. We've all faced this as professionals, but also as individuals with our own families, concerns about them, whether they be on the Isle of Man or across, and difficulties communicating with them. And I suppose is that communication which has been key and also an issue, because most of us who go into various walks of life, whether that be politics, whether that be medicine, or whether that be education, are interested in people. We're interested in communicating with people. You, in your roles, even more so, because you're educating them as well. And if you take that away and make that virtual and make everything have to happen on a screen, you lose some of that human contact. And that's when communications can break down, understanding can break down even further. And I think we've seen that on the island. However, we've also seen, in terms of remote learning, as Carol said, teachers really rising to the challenge very, very quickly, and across a whole range of issues. What may be applicable to a 15, 16-year-old is not applicable to a primary school child. And I think that's one of the issues we haven't addressed properly, is in terms of setting parents' expectations, because some of the issues that have been broadcast, for a better word, on social media don't show an understanding of education. They assume that everyone will have virtual classrooms and that's the best way to educate. It's not. You know, you as teachers know your own pupils, you know your own communities, and you know the best way to reach them. And so at the start, I tried to go around all the hub schools, and I met teachers who were printing out workbooks to drop off to parents who were self-isolating, couldn't get out of their homes. People who were phoning up regularly, who were engaging online, who were doing a huge amount of work at the same time as teaching face-to-face in terms of the vulnerable children and the hub schools. And I think, particularly on the Isle of Man, it's been very easy for some people to compare what's happened in the state sector with the private sector. In the private sector, they just got rid of all the pupils. They all went home. It was relatively easy for them to set up a completely online school. The teachers on the Isle of Man have been doing both for the last 3 months, have been educating people remotely and face-to-face as well. And that's been a real challenge, but I think we've all learned a huge amount out of it. What I'd like to do, I suppose, is try to bank some of those positives, address and recognise some of the negatives, but look at what's worked properly, look at what's worked well for both us in terms of an education service and the wider community, and try to see how we can go on from that. Because I think particularly with remote learning and supporting people who can't come into school, whether that be pupils or staff as well, there have been some real lessons learned that we can now hopefully take forward. One of the issues we've got is a great day for the Isle of Man. The people of the island, in that sense of community, has done amazingly well to halt the spread of the virus, but that threat is still there. And I suppose what we're now dealing with is adapting to that risk. When government started out, the message was very much stay at home. Don't go out, limit it, unless really, really necessary. Then we moved on a couple of weeks ago to the sort of stay safe, that people could start going out and could start interacting a little bit more within that risk parameter. We're now moving on to what will probably be called a stay responsible phase, which is almost business as usual, but we have to recognise we will never be the same people or the same island as we were before. We have gone through quite a traumatic period, both in terms of society and personally, and we need to adapt to that. And we also need to adapt to the real possibility that at times we may have outbreaks of the virus again. I hope not, but being realistic, it would be incredible if we didn't get some more outbreaks, particularly as we try to open up the borders and get people coming backwards and forwards a little bit more. So what the next phase will be is very much, I suppose, an awareness of that risk, an assessment of that risk, and the ability that should things deteriorate on the island, we can work together to meet that risk. Now, what does that mean? It may mean that we need to go back to social distancing. It may mean we need to close things again if things got really bad. But now that we've learned how we can do that in a controlled and coordinated way, I think we've got that resilience to move forward and do that a lot better and protect ourselves for the future. The other thing that's incredibly different now than it was in March is the ability to test, trace and track, which is found to be fundamental in terms of any jurisdiction dealing with a viral pandemic. And I'd like to thank Henrietta, Ewart and her team for all the work they put into that. Because again, when we started off in March, we were dependent on boxes of swabs coming over from the UK, having to take them, then fly them back and getting results sometimes 3-4 days later. What we now have is on-island testing. We can get the results back easily within 24 hours. And we've got the people who can do the contact tracing. Lots been said about new technologies and apps and electronic ways of doing it. Actually, to deal with health emergencies adequately, you need people who know what they're doing, who can go out and talk to individuals in a very one-to-one way. And so the systems we've got set up now from a health point of view, I think will build in that resilience and hopefully build in that confidence both for members of staff to be able to come back to school and express their fears, express their apprehensions and have those addressed and met, but also to deal with that apprehension of parents sending their children back to school as well, and how we can encourage as many parents to do that. Because one of the realities is we're going to be really stretched to run and continue to run a two-tier service where we've got people coming in physically, but also trying to provide remote learning for some when they're at home. And again, in terms of a department and a profession, we need to try to find ways of dealing with that dichotomy. I hope it's not for long, I hope it's not that major, but it's trying to make sure that we have education for all on the Isle of Man, which I know as a profession you're very keen on ensuring, particularly at a time of crisis, which has shown some of the inequalities we have on our island, whether it be educational inequalities, but particularly income inequalities and inequalities to do with resources and the availability of people to have things like online access. So that's just a very brief introduction to me and my feelings. But again, I'd just like to thank the NAHT for laying this on, because key to both dealing with the pandemic, but particularly key to moving on, is that communication. And doing virtual communication, I've seen that we can, deal with 127 people here at the moment. It would be very rare to be able to get that number of people into a room somewhere on the Isle of Man on such a nice day. So if we can continue using blended meetings like this in the same ways we may have to use blended learning, I think we can actually move together both in terms of a government and a profession. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Allison. And again, thank you for your time this evening and for making the effort to come and speak directly to the profession tonight. It is very much appreciated. So before I move on to the full questions that we've had in advance and the questions we've had in the night, could I ask you just to clarify and just to set out exactly where we're up to with the full or wider reopening of schools on the Isle of Man?
So certainly, I mean, today was a big day. Last week, in view of the improving health situation on the island, the Chief Minister announced that the aim was to get rid of social distancing on the Isle of Man across the country. And it was a pragmatic view based on the very low level of risk we have here. I don't think anyone's going to say there's absolutely no risk, but the very low level of risk, we have no evidence of person-to-person transmission for well over 3 weeks now, and we have no active cases on the Isle of Man, so we're in a good position to move forward. What we need to do is to do that in a controlled manner, and so there was political pressure last week to have some big bang and open everything on Monday without actually appreciating the work that teachers have already put in at the time when they thought they'd have hopefully a 1 metre social distancing. So where we are on the island is that today all schools were open to teachers. Those teachers who can come back to school have come back. Hopefully we'll get a better assessment of those who feel unable to come back and how we can support them. On Wednesday, those hub schools, the children there will go back to their own local schools. And then on Monday, we'll be trying to bring back the rest of the children back into full-time education. Initially, we wanted to do that on a phase basis and bring back years 2 and 6 and 10 and 12. But what the department have been doing today is contacting all head teachers to say, how could we accelerate that, given the dropping of social distancing and given the much reduced risk on the Isle of Man. And so it's really my hope that we could encourage as many pupils as possible to come back next week so that we could actually regenerate education, that face-to-face teaching. Because without that, I know certain teachers were getting quite apprehensive about having to be gatekeepers on the door in terms of who they let in and who they let out, almost on a quota system. I think if we can guarantee that we have the right staffing levels, the right resources in terms of cleaning and catering and caretaking, the right resources in terms of hand cleaning, hand washing, then we can invite all the children that want to come back, still bearing in mind that there will be some who, for either medical reasons or due to their parents' concerns, do not want to come back to education at the moment. And then it's a matter of how we deal with them as a whole and how we provide education to them as well as that reassurance.
Thank you very much for that, Alex. So I have a question that came in advance. There's a few questions that came in advance that is somewhat the events of today, and what you've just said there kind of overrides that a little bit. But there's a question from Rachel Moore, which you touched on just when you were answering that, but specifically about vulnerable teaching staff who were advised to work from home when the student numbers were lower and when social distancing was planned. And now expected to return with higher pupil numbers and potentially with the full reopening of schools from Monday with no social distancing. Is anything being put in place specifically for vulnerable teaching staff to protect their health, both physical and mental?
Yeah, and I think that's a very understandable question because we have moved quite rapidly. At the moment, the health situation on the Isle of Man is stable, it's resilient. And those people who were shielding because of pre-existing medical conditions, really I'd advise that they have a chat with the Office of Human Resources, who have produced guidance for them. In terms of coming back to school if they feel apprehensive, one of the other things we offered was testing for them should they want it, and fast-track testing should they develop any symptoms, but also the option of PPE as well. And all schools should be provided with the availability of PPE should they need it. So what I'm hoping is that we've now got a transition period from having a very relatively limited number of people coming into school in terms of both staff and pupils. As we gradually expand that, we can deal with these issues on a person-by-person basis, because all of them will be individual. For people who have been given letters for shielding, perhaps Henrietta could come in to talk about the change across the islands that's been introduced with them. Because in terms of risk assessment, what we're now at a stage is dealing with a very, very low risk of coronavirus in the island, but a much higher risk of social isolation, mental health issues, well-being issues, both in adults and children. And so it's now trying to give those people the confidence now to come back in, because the risk is so low in our society in general, but also in our schools.
Dr. Ewart, would you like to come in at that point and give some messages to vulnerable staff and potentially those?
Yes, I mean, Alex has covered it very well, actually. So first of all, I'd just like to say that I absolutely agree with everything he's just said. The issue with the people who were in the clinically vulnerable groups is that they had existing conditions, underlying conditions that make them more at risk of severe COVID illness if they catch COVID-19. And the context that we have to remember is that actually at the moment we have this fantastic situation where the risk of any of us catching COVID-19 on island is extremely low. So that means that although they would still be at risk of having more severe illness if they were to catch it, their chances actually of catching it are at the moment really vanishingly small. So that's really bringing us into the territory that Alex was discussing, that actually the harms of staying shielding, staying self-isolated at home, are now going to outweigh the benefits of getting back out into a more normal way of life. And I think, you know, the tiny risk that still exists, there are ways to mitigate it even further. Alex touched on the availability of PPE. and so on. But frankly, the background risk at the moment is such that even that isn't a major concern at the moment. Obviously, the key to that is monitoring the situation in the island, which we do through the ongoing testing programme, which not only makes testing very readily available for people with even the mildest of symptoms, and for the last few days, virtually nobody has been coming forward even with symptoms for assessment, which reflects the situation here. But we also continue to do the screening testing. It's offered to occupational groups, including teachers, and we also test people who are coming to the hospital for whatever reason. So that would actually give us a way of understanding as quickly as possible, even if we have asymptomatic virus circulating, and we've got no evidence of that at all. If we ever did, and as soon as we did, we would very quickly get the messages out, particularly to the people in the clinically vulnerable groups, to remind them of the things that they can do to reduce the risk. Or if we did start getting sustained transmission again, then we would have to look at going back to re-advising the shielding and the staying at home. But at the moment, the message is very much that the risk is extremely low, and we can start getting back to something that looks a lot more like normal.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Ewart. So I have another question for Alex. It's from Jamie Cox. On Friday in scrutiny meeting, you mentioned that schools will continue to support children who choose not to return to school. Now all children can return to school, and teachers will be full-time supporting those children in school. Who will provide the support for those at home?
Yeah, and again, I think this is one of the realities, that it's very hard to run two education systems at once. We don't know yet how many children will not be able or will not feel able to come back to school, and we'll probably get a better idea of that this week. I think we've got to a stage now where we would encourage all those children to come back to school. Again, as Henrietta said, because of the risk profile, the benefits of coming back to school for them, both educationally, but also in terms of their well-being, mental health and social interactions, far outweighs any risk of coronavirus. We will still emphasise that if children are unwell, they should not come into school. If children have symptoms, they should report to 111 and get tested. And obviously simple things like hand washing is very important. It always has been at schools, it's now even more so. From a department's point of view, once we know the extent of the issue with those children who are at home and need educational provision, we'll be looking at how we can work with teachers to provide that. There may still be teachers working from home who can do that, or we may need to utilise the team that normally provide for children who are ill. These children, by definition, are ill. They have pre-existing conditions. So how we can do that as a department working together with teachers. Obviously, each case will be individual, and so we will perhaps be relying upon teachers' recommendations for the best way of reaching out to those children. But teachers on the Isle of Man are coming back to a full-time job in school, and we need to be very, very careful that they're not asked to do a part-time job on top of that, which would be teaching remotely. You can't do both at the same time, and we have to put in perhaps extra provision once we know the number of children who will continue to need remote learning.
Thank you very much for answering that, Dr. Allinson. The next question is from Nicola Kerr. She says, there was a question asked at today's briefing regarding schools and summer holidays. Are there any plans for shorter holidays or possibly staying open?
Oh, my controversial bit. No, there are no plans, no. And I suppose one of the things that I was really interested today is to get your feelings. Because again, it's very easy on social media or in terms of government to say, oh, why don't you just stay open for another 2 weeks? Why don't you just have summer schools? Why don't you just do this? Without any appreciation of actually what that entails and how difficult that would be. I know that Wales have slightly extended their school term, but only by 3 or 4 days into the middle of the following week. We need to have a discussion with you and the other unions in terms of, is that something your members would want? Would you want to extend the term? with obviously the extra wages that would bring in, but the extra work that would bring in. I think starting the autumn term early, when it's already the longest term we have, would be fraught with difficulties. And in terms of summer schools, one of the best reports I've read was from the Educational Policy Institute, which is all about preventing the disadvantage gap from increasing during the pandemic. And they made the issue, if you don't mind me quoting it, of irrespective of when schools formally reopen, the government, along with schools, should consider making summer school holiday provision available for all children, particularly the most vulnerable and disadvantaged. This should not necessarily be focused on academic catch-up, but should provide young people with positive activities, engagement and pastoral support. Such provision would not need to be staffed by teachers and could instead be run by a combination of youth workers, play workers, early year workers, and others with relevant experience. And so I think, you know, when people talk about summer schools, there is a catch-up in terms of people's social development, their mental well-being, their general health and their ability to interact with other pupils, which goes above and beyond just maths and English lessons. And I'd be far keener on working with various parts of the department and teachers in terms of the summer programme that provides that. Traditionally on the Isle of Man, Manx Sports and Recreation have run activity sessions, and they're planning to do that again. But what I've already asked them to do is, can we add something in there in terms of a more holistic approach to young people who have been isolated in their homes for a couple of months? So can we look at mindfulness? Can we look at relaxation sessions as well as chasing around the football? Can we look at those ways of interacting people together, getting their behaviour and conduct back to normal, so that when they go back to school, hopefully in September, if everything stays the same as it is, they can be integrated back into a classroom in a much better way. So in terms of lengthening the school year, I'm open to suggestions from the profession, but there's no plan. In terms of the summer holidays, there are plans, but those wouldn't necessarily involve teachers unless you, as a profession, wanted to get involved with that, or you over the next couple of weeks before the end of term, found issues there that we hadn't anticipated, because we've never been in this situation before with such a long break in education, but also such a traumatic time for our society at the same time. And I think we will find things that have happened over the last couple of months which rear their ugly heads when people get back. And then I think sharing those experiences and trying to address those in a holistic way for those children and those members of staff as well is incredibly important.
Thank you very much for that, Alex. And that leads me quite nicely actually onto the next question, which is from Ali Vondi. So teachers are putting a lot of preparation and thought into making the transition back to school positive and supportive for pupils. Is DESK going to offer practical help to teachers and staff transitioning back to the new normal, especially with regard to their mental health after such a sustained period of stress, trauma and change?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the Safeguarding and Inclusion team have been looking at ways of integrating pupils back into the classrooms and giving training to members of staff in terms of recognising those pupils who may be struggling. We've also been trying to increase the ability to refer people to educational psychologists, and we'll be doing quite a lot of work in terms of rejuvenating the listening service run by the young people's team. In terms of members of staff, though, that's certainly something I've brought up with the mental health team, that across the board, government workers have been at the front line. Now, normally we'd expect doctors and nurses, actually teachers have been at the front line as well. They have been frontline workers. And so we need to recognise their apprehension coming back, but also recognise some of the things that they've had to deal with, either professionally or personally as well. They may have known people who've died of the disease. They've been stopped from going to see family across that they may be concerned about. So there's a much wider bit of work there that we need to do in terms of opening up that pastoral and psychological help for those teachers who are struggling. And really, I suppose we're relying on head teachers to create that open environment when people come back, so that people can be honest about the way they feel. You can't be macho forever. People will have struggled. People will have problems coming back into their working environment because it's changed. The whole island and each of us as individuals has changed. And I think by having that open discourse and by reaching out for help, I will be working with mental health to provide that help if it's needed.
Thank you very much for that reassurance, which I'm sure will be very welcome by everybody listening tonight and everyone in the profession. The next question I have is from Annette Baker. She asks, do you agree with the comments of the desk chief executive at the Public Accounts Committee meeting on Friday, that the reason for the so-called inconsistency in online learning during the crisis was the non-cooperation of teaching unions?
Yeah. I mean, as I said right at the start, I think that the PAC, the questions that they asked, and it was an investigation of the department, were skewed, and some of them didn't understand what remote learning meant. The CEO, Professor Barr, made some comments about actually short of strike, and said that that was contributing to what was described by some of the people asking us questions as a postcode lottery. I don't think it has been a postcode lottery. I think teachers across the country have risen very, very well to the challenges in a very short space of time to provide a whole range of different ways of providing remote learning. Professor Barr mentions the action short of strike. I do not see that as a fundamental issue with the difference between different schools and the difference between individual parents' experience of remote learning. One of the questions that was asked was about in terms of quality assurance of online work and how could we do that. The reality is that nobody yet has found a way, even Ofsted have said that there's no way in the UK of providing quality assurance of online work. It's impossible, it does not exist. And until we get some sort of online curriculum that you can then fact check with, you're not going to be able to do that. And I think there's been a fundamental misapprehension about what parents should expect and what some parents should expect. My feedback from the vast majority of parents is that they've been absolutely overwhelmed with the care, effort and flexibility that teachers have put in to either face-to-face learning or online teaching. When I've seen things on particularly Twitter or Facebook saying nobody's ever talked to my child for 3 months, I don't believe that. I really don't. That's certainly not my experience from interactions with parents where it's completely the other side. So I apologise if teachers and other people who work in the education service took offence at one of Bar's comments. They certainly, from my point of view, would never be meant to denigrate the profession or to criticise the profession, and I do apologise if it's been taken that way.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Allison. And the final question for you, can we offer clarity for parents that attendance would need to be consistent within schools? I fear we may have children in and out. We will not be checking on attendance as per normal procedures. So from a safeguarding perspective, who is checking on them? That's from Burton.
Yeah, I think what I'm certainly keen on doing is getting some clear messages out to parents this week. It is not business as usual. Classes are going to be different, and some of the other questions, perhaps for Henrietta, are going to be quite interesting in terms of things like assemblies and music and singing and those sort of things, and how we deal with schools. In terms of parents, they have a responsibility to have that consistent approach in terms of their children. Right at the start of the health emergency, we removed the obligation to parents that they had to send their children to school and gave it to their choice, which I think was the right thing to do, absolutely. What we now need to do is educate them in terms of the risk, and that's not just parents, it's right across society. Educate them in terms of risk, but actually say now, we think the best place for them, for their child, is in school, in terms of both education, well-being, and also the interaction with their peers and their class friends. So we're going to try to give out that clear message that actually they should be sending their child back to school if they can. However, there's also an obligation on them to make sure that if their child is unwell, they don't come back, if there are any issues that they alert the teacher to, and that child behaves when they're at school in terms of applying simple public health methods such as not coughing or spitting over other pupils, washing their hands regularly, actually integrating themselves back into an environment where there is order, where there is structure, and when they need to respect that.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Allinson, and thank you again for your time this evening. And I think that nicely leads on to us inviting Dr. Ewart to take the floor. So if Dr. Ewart, if you'd like to give a short address, if there's anything you'd like to say to begin with, but we also do have lots of questions for you, which you'd welcome the opportunity to answer. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just do a sort of quick scene setting then so that we can use most of the time for questions. So as we've already heard today, we've now gone for 26 days with no new confirmed case of COVID-19 and no active cases on island. So effectively, that means we have very low and in all probability, no community transmission of virus at the moment. So as we were saying before when we were talking about people in the vulnerable groups, actually the risk for any of us now of catching COVID here on island is extremely low. So that means that all the behaviours that we were adopting and all the restrictions we had to mitigate the risk actually are not needed in the way they were before, because that risk is now no longer there. So we can actually very much go back to behaving in a much more normal way, because the likelihood of anything out there that is going to transmit if our behaviours change just is not there at the moment. So we can talk about that in the questions if people want to explore what that means in terms of assemblies and music lessons and so on. We can't say that we're 100% safe. There is an absolutely outside chance that there is a very low level of transmission which is not causing any symptoms. The longer we go without a diagnosed case, the less likely that is. And frankly, we've really gone beyond the point of 26 days where there is very much likelihood of that. So the risk that remains for us is now the risk of imported cases coming in from elsewhere. Obviously, people may be aware that New Zealand has really sealed its borders, and that's why they can take all restrictions off in the way that they have done. We can't seal our borders in that way because we're reliant on things coming in from outside. That obviously includes, day-to-day provisions, but it also includes, key workers who are needed to do roles that we can't get by without and which we don't have anybody on island to do. So all of that can be mitigated to a very large extent by various means, either 14 days self-isolation, which is the gold standard really for stopping spread from a case that's come in from outside. Where that's not feasible because a person is needed to do what they need to do on island from the minute they arrive here, then we try to control that by testing and also by ensuring that they self-isolate when they're not in the workplace, and when they are in the workplace that they use appropriate PPE to protect others from them. So that is as strong a mitigation as we can get. We can't guarantee that it will be 100% effective. So the next layer of mitigation is to have the very effective test, trace and isolate process so that we would diagnose cases as soon as possible. Their contacts will be identified as soon as possible, and both the cases and the contacts can then self-isolate to stop the risk of any further spread. So we hope that we won't see any further cases, but the next level up from that is sporadic cases, so that's single cases which we can get completely under control through test, trace and isolate. The next level up from that is actually the beginnings of community transmission. That would be potentially in form of clusters, so groups of cases that are related perhaps to a workplace or related to a wider geographical area. Again, we would hope that test, trace and isolate can get that under control before it moves into what is known as sustained community transmission. And that's where we were before, where you have cases cropping up at the same time, but in lots of different places, no associations between them, because it is actually just spreading out there through the community. If we go back to that, that's the point at which we have to look at elevating back up to the levels of restriction and control that we had before. And we're ready to do that, and that's the whole point. We have to be ready to do that. But at the moment, we're in the very happy position of, you know, having that as the backstop, but not needing to go there at the moment. So I think that's probably all I need to say in terms of setting the background, and probably move over to taking questions.
Thank you very much, Henrietta, for that. So we've got quite a few specific questions on certain issues that people would like some answers to relating to schools. So hopefully you'll be able to help us with those. I'm going to start off asking about singing, because that's something that's come up both in advance from Tracy Willoughby. It's come up from Heather Dakin on the live questions tonight. Sorry, it's Katie Lawrence who asked it in advance. Could you possibly give an indication as to whether singing in groups, in class or in rehearsals, both in school and outside of school groups, is considered safe? And if so, is there any restrictions on numbers?
As of now, it's considered safe because the background levels of COVID are so low, there is nothing to try and mitigate against. So I think singing can start again. Obviously, it has lots of positive benefits in terms of, you know, people working cooperatively together. That's good for mental health, it's good for socialisation, and particularly good for children, you know, cooperative working to produce something together. The issue about singing is that what happens during singing and the way one sings and vocalises, you're more likely to generate an aerosol of droplets from your mouth than just talking or, you know, not speaking at all. So when COVID is transmitting in the community, that would be one of the higher risk activities that we would advise restricting early on. But at the moment, with the background risk being what it is, there is no reason to restrict it. So it is, along with pretty much all other activities, something that we can start again. But bearing in mind that as a high-risk activity, it would be one of the first ones we'd have to restrict if the situation changes.
So on that note as well, face-to-face musical tuition, Maggie Richardson asked a question about that. Is that able to commence as well? And if so, is there a particular date or is it from today?
Yes, I mean, I think it can restart. In terms of the date, I think the government is moving towards things moving on Thursday, I think. But actually, to be honest, there is no medical reason why you couldn't be planning these things in and getting everything back up and running from now on.
Thank you very much, Henrietta. Question from Lisa Lilly. Why did we decide not to go down to 1 metre social distancing first before removing it fully? Surely when the border opens, it would be wise to still have some distance, as the UK will probably still have higher social distancing and higher COVID rates than us.
Yeah. The social distancing, the whole issue is a very interesting one. And the distance that is defined for social distancing is also very interesting. There have been studies going back to the 1930s that have tried to estimate how far droplets expelled during different activities, which, you know, could include coughing, sneezing, singing, shouting, doing cardiorespiratory exercise that raises the heart and respiratory rate and causes mouth breathing. All those things people have tried to look at in terms of what that does to how far droplets can travel from your mouth. Of course, it's not only about the person and what they're doing that propels the droplets. There are also all sorts of factors about the ambient conditions. Are you indoors in a closely confined space with no air circulating? Or are you outdoors on a beautiful day with a light breeze, or, you know, any permutation in between? Because all those things will have an impact on how far droplets can travel. But we're back again to the issue of the background risk, which is if there's no background risk, it doesn't really matter how far droplets travel, because a droplet without any virus in it isn't going to give you virus anyway. So in terms of the setting of the distance, right from the beginning of the pandemic, there have been differences in approach. The World Health Organization has always advised a minimum of a metre, at least 1 metre. UK obviously went for 2, New Zealand went for 2, the advisory body CDC in the US went for 2. Australia went for 1.5, and various other countries went for 1.5 or 1, or they went initially for a higher distance and then brought it down as the background risk changed. Now, as I said, for us, the longer we've gone without any new cases being identified, the more clear we are that we don't have anything transmitting, even at asymptomatic level. And that issue about have we got symptomatic, is it asymptomatic, is also important, because when you know you've got symptomatic cases circulating in the community, your first piece of guidance is, as soon as you've got symptoms, you've got a new cough, you're feeling feverish, you've had a change in your sense of taste or smell, get yourself indoors and stay there. Contact 111, get yourself clinically assessed, get tested if appropriate, stay self-isolated, and follow the guidance from the testing service as to whether you need to do that for 14 days. But nevertheless, there is always the risk that some people either wittingly or more kindly unwittingly are out there around others while they've got symptoms. If they're coughing, they're going to transmit those infected droplets over that bigger distance, so the 2 meters is more important. Once we were getting into that phase of not having any more symptomatic cases, then we're more worried about the much lower risk of asymptomatic spread. And that's still a very open question. Some authorities, some experts say people who are asymptomatic are actually very unlikely to transmit it to others. Other authorities say, actually, we don't really know that. There is some evidence that they could be still transmitting, but the risk is much lower. And certainly if we think about the distance, because they're not coughing, and so long as they're not singing or shouting or doing the heavy cardiorespiratory work that causes the mouth breathing and the transmission of droplets, if all they're doing is going about quiet, normal business and not doing any more than just talking to people, then the risk of transmitting over the bigger distance is much lower. So that was the rationale for thinking we're now safe to move from a recommendation of 2 meters to one of 1 meter. And that's where we were geared up, where we were redrafting all the guidance to talk about 1 meter. But of course, time has gone on, and we're now in that happy position of having a much longer time period with no new cases. And that's why we now feel confident to actually take off even the 1 meter distance, because with that very low background rate, there really isn't a strong rationale for saying, let's go for 1 meter for a while. We've really gone long enough to say, you know, we know the risk is low.
Thank you very much for that very thorough answer, and very much appreciated. You've alluded to the answers to some of these in your earlier comments, but I just want to specifically address them because they are quite peculiar to a school setting. So if you could just answer us on these specific questions that come from Jane Adamson. Should children, and it's a bit of a list, should children wear uniform or freshly washed clothes daily? Should children keep their own personal resources near their allocated seat during the day? Should we consider reducing contact situations such as assemblies, carpet time, school events and trips? Can children take reading books home and bring things in from home? Can the school libraries be opened, and should soft furnishings be returned to the classroom? So apologies, it's a bit of a list, but all very relevant things to school that I think the members of the profession listening would appreciate. Thank you.
They are, and they're all extremely relevant, so quite happy to address those. I mean, in fact, if I'd been answering this question last week, it would have been a very much longer answer, because obviously the risk assessment was not what it is today. But in the context we are today, actually none of those concerns actually need to drive specific guidance or actions in schools. All those things are now okay. Obviously, follow the good hygiene practices. Some of those things are around good habit formation, which will actually stand us in very good stead if we do have to ramp back up to more restrictions. So an obvious one there would be about children keeping their own belongings and keeping them for their single use and keeping them close to them. I think that would just be a simple one to keep going, because with that habit well ingrained, it then won't be an effort if we have to step up to re-implement that restriction. But the others, you know, the using of library books, the soft furnishings, I mean, again, that's one that's kind of take your own call. If you think it's easier not to have reintroduced them, by all means stick with it. But in terms of the actual risk of virus transmission at the moment, that's kind of not the issue. It would just be is it easier to keep a position that's much easier to escalate from, rather than bring in a lot of stuff that we're then going to have to take out again. Similarly, the children's clothes, that recommendation was all based on the fact that clothes can potentially act as a surface. So you might have virus levels building up, and particularly if somebody is asymptomatic and they've been busy doing as they should do, coughing, although hopefully they wouldn't have been coughing very much, because as soon as they realised they and their parents and teachers should have advised for them to be taken out of the situation. But just potentially virus could have built up on clothes, and therefore clean clothes each day, and the laundering in between is just a protector there. Again, the need for that falls away with the current context.
Thank you very much. And very specifically, we've got Louise Stewart asking tonight, particularly younger children, can they use sand, water, Play-Doh, things which could potentially water and absorbing any potential virus? And Debbie Watson wants to know, will we still need to wash resources at the end of each day, such as Duplo?
Yes, yes, they can do all those types of play. Most of those surfaces, the chance of virus surviving on them is theoretical rather than real. If you think about Play-Doh and things of that sort, it's the hard surfaces that are the ones where the virus has been shown to persist. So again, just the basic sanitizing, it's a good idea to keep in that habit. It's good environmental hygiene, and if you can do it, I've heard of suggestions that people stick Duplo in the dishwasher, that kind of thing. If you can do that, that's a very good thing to do. It's just about being in the habit of the very good environmental hygiene that will stand you in good stead and acts as a mitigation on the off chance that there is any symptomatic transmission going on. Unlikely though that currently is.
Thank you very much again. I've got a question from Geraldine O'Neill. She's asking if there is any updated data on the numbers of key workers who have been tested for the virus since testing became open to them on the 28th of May. Is there any breakdown at showing how many education staff specifically have taken up from this date?
As soon as I saw that question, I passed it on to the 111 testing team who hold that data. They haven't got back to me with the detailed breakdown, but they have been able to say that the numbers coming forward for that asymptomatic testing offer in total, so that's health and care workers, teachers and the other groups to whom it was opened, the uptake has been extremely low. They're seeing very little coming through from that. When I do get the numbers, I'll share them. But at the minute, that's the feedback I've got. And I think, it's not very pleasant having the swabs done. And given that with the 26 days of no confirmed cases, the likelihood of anybody unwittingly asymptomatically carrying virus is very low. And people may be, making their own decision about whether the testing feels like something that they need to come forward for.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. The next question is from Rob Cool. He asks, should we continue to be careful with regards to visitors into school and holding events that invite large numbers of people that are not staff or pupils?
Well, again, at the moment, there is no rationale for advising that. The only thing one would say about it is wherever possible, if you can keep a list of who's been in, so that on the unlikely event that any cases do come up, then the contact tracers can swing into action as quickly as possible. But yes, there is no actual clinical rationale for restricting at the moment.
Thank you very much. And just to clarify, this question from Tracy Willoughby came in, but I think you may have already addressed it. She was asking if there's any adaptations need to be placed into a classroom layout of tables. Can groups of 4, 6, 8 children, as would be usual in a primary school, sit around tables, groups face to face? Can children sit side by side? Do we need bubbles within school?
The answer to that is that things can go back to normal. Bubbles and indeed the seating arrangements are obviously designed to prevent spread between groups, either within a small group or from one small group into another small group. It's all about creating a system that has automatic breaks in lines of transmission. But against the current context, that's no longer needed at the moment.
Thank you very much for that clear answer. Next question is from Esther Drain. If a child becomes ill and has to isolate, does the whole class or the teacher have to isolate too?
No, they don't. A child that has symptoms of any sort needs to not come into school or to be separated and arranged to be taken out of school as quickly as possible. Once they've got home, obviously the thing for them to do is take the appropriate medical advice, because at the moment the chance of a child's illness being due to COVID is very, very low. There are a host of other explanations that are going to be much more likely. So we are not in a position where pretty much any illness would be COVID until proven otherwise. We're almost moving to the opposite. So contact the appropriate advice line 111, find out if the child needs to be tested, and follow advice on whether they need to be self-isolated while the testing's done, and then follow the advice when the test result is back. The test result, if it's positive, then the contact tracers will swing into action, and at that point the school will be contacted, obviously as a matter of priority if it's a child, and the appropriate assessment and advice will be given at that point.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Ewart, and thank you very much for answering all of our questions this evening. I think you've answered numerous questions. Hopefully we've covered most of what members who are in attendance here tonight would like to have heard, but a recording of this broadcast will be available tomorrow. It will be on the NAHT website, and we will advertise it via Twitter at NAHT News, and also we will be sending an email out to those of you who have watched the broadcast tonight. But thank you very much again, Dr. Ewart. We really appreciate the clarity that you provided tonight and being willing to answer several questions from members in attendance this evening. So thank you very much. I'll now move on. Thank you. I'll now move on to Max Kelly, who is the branch president of NAHT in the Isle of Man. To say he's a serving head teacher of schools in Laxey. And I would like to invite him to respond to what he's heard tonight and to speak to those of you who are listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Can you hear me?
We can, yes, thank you.
Oh, fabulous, thank you. I'd just like to start by saying it's a huge honour to serve as the president of the Isle of Man branch of NAHT. I'd like to give a big thank you to all of you, the members of NAHT in the Isle of Man. We are the biggest and most active union of senior and middle school leaders in the Isle of Man. And can I just say, I am immensely proud of all of you and of how we being the NAHT, how we have conducted ourselves throughout this pandemic. We are a union. We are here to represent our members and to be their voice. We have questioned, we have sought clarification, we have made suggestions, of course we have, but we have also cooperated with the department and with the government throughout. We wrote very early on in the pandemic to the Chief Minister to make this assertion. But we are also a professional association as well as a trade union. And that means that we care about values, we care about morals, we care about children. We have never held anything up. We have never obstructed. We have always done everything that is asked of us. And contrary to some of what is in the public domain, some from well-intentioned but perhaps ill-informed comments on social media, and sometimes from inaccurate or misrepresentative comments from the department, NAHT and the unions have not and are not holding up the wider reopening of schools. The school leaders on the Isle of Man are ready. We are prepared. We are, and never have been, the hold up to that. And it's happening. And heads have fed back today to the department to say, let's make that happen. I think we can all agree that we're pleased to hear that that is happening. I want to thank Minister Allinson for his time tonight. Thank you, Minister. NAHT welcome your engagement, your positive engagement. Unions, the NAHT have, I believe, a good working relationship with you on a personal level. And I hope very much that you can be the conduit to facilitating a strong relationship with DESC. That is what we all want. We want a strong cooperative relationship. That is surely in the interests of families, of pupils, of the Isle of Man. A constructive dialogue with the department is what we all want for the good of the children and for that world-class education system which we strive to deliver. So I hope, Minister, now that perhaps you can begin to deliver for the department in terms of seeking to engage in constructive dialogue with us to end the industrial dispute. It would be good to find a department ready to talk, and it would be good for everyone on this island, but most of all for the hard-working professionals and for our pupils. It would be so good to be able to draw a line under that as quickly as possible. And we really wanted to do that with you. We also welcome the external review into the department, and we stand, NAHT stand ready to feed into that constructively and positively in order to deliver positive improvement, which again can only be a good thing for the Isle of Man. Now, it's great. The global pandemic, it feels as though it's lessening its grip here in the Isle of Man. But away from the COVID response, our work at NAHT goes on. The education bill goes for its second reading in Keys later this month. NAHT, and I believe actually in symmetry with the general public on this, continue to have reservations about this bill. And that's not new information. We are not supportive of it as it currently stands. But that is not to say that we are not supportive of refreshed and relevant new legislation. But let's get it right. Members, we are issuing a submission to all Tynwald members later on today. And members, you will get a copy of that as well which I think sums up our feelings and our comments on the education bill. And I urge any Tynwald members who might be part of this webinar this evening to look at and to consider that submission. And our door is always open if anybody wishes to talk with us. And finally, pension reform is a hot topic at the moment, and one that affects all of our members. And Paul, our General Secretary, has written to the Pension Minister in respect of the pension reform. And again, we stand ready to work with government. We know reform and change are needed. We're not obstructive or awkward about that. But we say, listen to us, engage with us. That's what we want to do. And a copy of Paul's letter will go to all members tonight as well. So, Minister, thank you for coming today. And I extend NAHT's arm, supportive and constructive, for the profession, for the children, and let's make some good happen. Thank you also to Dr. Henrietta Ewart. You've been very generous with your time and with your expertise. It's extremely valuable and very reassuring, actually, to have access to your insight. And I know that our members watching tonight have greatly appreciated listening to some really clear advice. So thank you for your time. I'll finish just by paying tribute to the teaching profession in the Isle of Man. Sometimes without much guidance, you've responded by being approachable and positive human beings. I know that you want the best for the children of this island, and that's why you'll want to get the children back into schools next week. It's great to see you all. Warm wishes as always. NAHT for leaders, for learners. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Max. Thank you very much to all our panellists for joining us this evening, to Max and to Carol, our branch president and branch secretary in NAHT in the Isle of Man, to Paul Whiteman, NAHT General Secretary, but a particular thank you certainly for the length of time, but also the detail and the clarity of their answers from Dr. Henrietta Ewart. As Max said, I think that will be very reassuring to many of the people listening tonight, and we're very grateful for the opportunity you've given us to pose these specific questions that the teaching profession have and to provide some clear answers, so thank you. And also thank you to Dr. Allinson, first of all for joining us tonight. I think that's a symbol of the positive relationship that we've built up since you took over in early March, which I know you referenced, and it's very much a relationship that NAHT wants to build on going forwards, both with yourself and with the whole of government. We're looking to go forward and to move forward positively, but as I said, I think you coming here tonight and answering the questions is very significant and very much shows that. So thank you very much for your time and the spirit of which you've joined us tonight. If you have any specific questions, if you're an NAHT member and if you're looking for some advice, we have our specialist advice line, which you can join. You can find the number on the NAHT website. We also have our frequently asked questions that we'll be able to update you with there. There will be a replay of this broadcast tomorrow. You'll be able to watch it as often as you like, and also to share with any colleagues who maybe did not join us this evening. That will be on the NAHT website from tomorrow, and we will tweet from NAHT News as to where the link is for that, so you'll be able to see it. We're looking to be holding a branch meeting for NAHT members in the Isle of Man in the next coming weeks as we look to get back to the new normal and to move forward. And if you're not a member of NAHT, you're very welcome to join us. There will be a link posted in the chat room if you do want to join NAHT. But the main call actually is just to make sure you're a member of a union, whatever union it is. If it's one of our sister trade unions, it's really important, particularly in times of crisis, that workers and education professionals, we come together and to try and build a better education system for the young people that we all want to serve. If you're interested in getting more involved in NAHT, if you are an NAHT member, please do get in touch with Carol or Max if you have their email addresses, or you can email organising@naht.org.uk. But the union is its members, its lifeblood is its members, and it's nothing without you, and it's nothing without you coming forward. So if you think you could not only just be a leader in your school, but a leader in your union, we'd love to hear from you. And on that note, I'd like to thank you all for being here tonight. We had nearly 150 people joining us, which was fantastic. And I hope it's provided some clarity and some reassurance. Thank you again for you all being here. And thank you very much to our panelists. And on that note, I'll say good night. Thank you very much.